Welcome. You're listening to Detective Duo, bringing you tales from the golden age of mystery, adventures in the spirit of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford. Tap subscribe to stay with us and share where in the world you're listening from. The final bid had barely settled in the hushed air of the Mayfair auction house when Tuppence Beresford snapped her notebook closed with the decisive click of a woman who had finished her errand and was already hungry for something more interesting. Tommy, meanwhile, was examining a catalogue as though it might explode, which Tuppence thought both unlikely and terribly dull. They had come only to preview a lot for an old friend, a harmless collection of watercolours, and she was just preparing to persuade Tommy toward a celebratory lunch when the quiet dignity of the auction rooms fractured. A shout, sharp, startled, wholly un-auction house-like, echoed from a side corridor. An attendant hurried by, nearly dropping a sheaf of polished brochures. Then another. Both were chasing a man who emerged at a stumbling run, his polished shoes slipping on the marble floor, his right hand clutching the doorframe as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the world. His complexion was the pale grey shade of a smoker after bad news, his collar askew and his gaze unfocused with terror. Tuppence reached him before the thought could intervene. "Steady there. Do sit." "No!" The word cracked through the air like glass. He jerked back from her touch as if she had attempted to strike him. Please don't help me. You don't understand. You mustn't." The sheer desperation in his voice froze the attendants mid-chase. Tommy's eyebrows shot up. Rarely did grown men recoil from Tuppence unless she had caught them in a lie, and even then they typically offered more dignity than this trembling figure. "I assure you," Tuppence said, hands raised in gentle surrender, "I'm not in the habit of harming strangers before luncheon." But the man's panic only deepened. His eyes darted toward the main gallery, to the discreet balconies above, to every possible corner where danger might lurk. Then, with sudden resolve, he fled, not toward the grand exit, but toward a narrow service door that swung open under his desperate push. In his wake, he left behind a dropped auction catalogue. It skidded on the floor, pages flipping open to reveal markings that were decidedly not the polite pencil strokes one usually saw. Arrows stabbed across lots, circles encompassed items of no apparent importance, initials trailed the margins like whispered accusations. Tuppence scooped it up before Tommy could voice his predictable objection about interfering with things best left alone. "Now, Tuppence," Tommy began. "Oh, hush. If a man practically throws a puzzle at my feet, it would be rude not to pick it up." The attendants, mortified and apologetic, assured them everything was under control. It was not entirely convincing. The manager himself soon arrived, clearing his throat in the manner of someone about to confess that control had recently left the premises. "Terribly sorry you were drawn into that disturbance, Mrs. Beresford. Mr. Trevelyan is, well, he's been under strain." "Trevelyan?" Tommy repeated. "The man who fled?" "Yes, Roland Trevelyan. He requested a private viewing of one of our secure lots, perfectly routine, and then abruptly panicked. Said he'd been recognized, which is, I must say, rather odd. Hardly anyone was present, and those who were certainly did not give chase." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. Recognized by whom? Recognized as what? She pocketed the catalogue more firmly. Did he say anything else? Only that he needed immediate clarity on a document from the lot. The manager seemed reluctant to elaborate. "I shouldn't say more. Confidentiality and all that." "Of course," Tuppence said sweetly, which was her tone for "tell me later when you think better of it." They stepped into the crisp brightness of the street outside. The auction house loomed behind them, immaculate and self-assured, as though refusing to admit anything unusual had occurred on its polished floors. Tommy adjusted his coat. "Well, I think that was quite enough adventure for one morning. Shall we find some place less dramatic for luncheon?" But Tuppence's gaze had fixed on a figure standing across the street, half-shadowed beneath the awning of a hat shop. The same man, Trevelyan. How he had reached the street so quickly was something she meant to ask him, except he wasn't looking at them with gratitude or relief. He was watching them with a strange, focused intensity, as if mentally weighing them against some private ledger. "Tommy," she murmured, "he's back." Trevelyan stiffened when their eyes met. For a heartbeat, he seemed about to approach. Tuppence even lifted her hand a fraction. Then he stepped off the curb. "Tommy!" she gasped. A taxi barreled toward him, horn blaring its indignation, wheels skidding. The driver's arm shot out the window as though that alone might halt physics. Trevelyan made no attempt to move, no instinct to leap away. If anything, he leaned slightly forward, a willing target. Tommy reacted before Tuppence's lungs could refill. He dashed across the pavement, seized Trevelyan by the arm and dragged him backward with all the force of a man accustomed to dealing with his wife's more adventurous acquaintances. The taxi screeched past, missing them by inches. Trevelyan's knees buckled. Tommy lowered him to the pavement with an economy of movement that suggested practice, though preferably not of this exact scenario. "Good heavens, man," Tommy snapped, breathless. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Trevelyan stared up at him, eyes swimming with an emotion that was not quite gratitude. "You shouldn't have saved me." His voice trembled, hoarse with despair. "You've made everything worse. You don't understand what you've done." Tuppence knelt beside them. "Perhaps not, but I'm terribly keen on understanding, so you might start by explaining." But Trevelyan shuddered violently, clutching at his chest, breath shortening. A small gathering of pedestrians had already begun to cluster, curious but cautious. A passing doctor, summoned by Tuppence's sharp call, gave a quick assessment. "Shock, stress, possibly more. He'll need immediate observation." Within minutes, a discreet private ambulance was arranged and Trevelyan was lifted onto a stretcher. Tommy and Tuppence stood back as the doors closed. Trevelyan opened his eyes for a fleeting second, looking straight at Tuppence with a haunted expression. "You must leave it alone," he rasped. "Both of you. If you help me again, you'll save the wrong man." The doors shut. The ambulance pulled into the stream of London traffic and disappeared from sight. Tommy exhaled. Well, that was a cheerful warning. Tuppence's hand slipped into her coat pocket, brushing the catalogue's marked pages, the arrows, the initials, the frantic scrawls. A man terrified of being recognized, terrified of being saved, and now terrified of them. "Tommy," she said softly, "people don't run from help unless something else is chasing them." He looked at her resignedly. "And you intend to chase whatever's chasing him." Tuppence smiled with the bright determination of a woman who had just tasted the first drop of mystery. Naturally. But as they turned away, Tommy paused. There, lying on the ground where Trevelyan had stood, was a small slip of paper fluttering like a frightened bird. He picked it up. It was a torn page from the catalogue, marked with a circle and a slash, and beneath it, in spidery handwriting, "He knows." The message shook in Tommy's hand. The street felt abruptly colder, though no breeze touched them. Tuppence's eyes gleamed with that unmistakable spark. "Tommy," she said, "I think we've just stepped into something rather dangerous." He sighed. "Yes, but do we have to do it before luncheon?" She linked her arm through his. "If we delay, darling, the mystery might try to solve itself. And where's the fun in that?" Together they walked on, unaware that, from a doorway not far behind, someone else watched them depart. Someone who had been waiting for them to intervene, someone who needed them involved, whether to destroy them or to save them. Tommy dusted his hands. "Well, Tuppence." Tommy glanced back at the auction house doors. "Well, Tuppence, shall we go home before something else collapses in front of us?" "Not until we inspect this properly." She withdrew the catalogue from her coat with a flourish. Its pages fluttered like a distressed bird. A man in a state of mortal fear doesn't scribble symbols for amusement. They hailed a taxi back to their South Audley Mansions flat, and once inside, Tuppence commandeered the dining table as her investigative battlefield. Sunlight streamed across the polished wood, illuminating the scrawls and marks Trevelyan had left in his wake. Tommy poured tea with the solemn air of a man performing first aid on himself. Let's see what our trembling friend found so alarming. The first oddity lay on Lot 47, miscellaneous estate papers, assorted correspondence, receipts, and personal archives. A perfectly dull assortment to the untrained eye, but Trevelyan had circled that entry not once but 3 times, each circle progressively darker, jagged, almost violent. Beside it he had drawn a single symbol, a circle with a slash through it, not the elegant diagonal line of negation, but a crude, forceful stroke tearing across the page. Tuppence tapped the mark with the end of her pencil. "This symbol appears here." She flipped another page. "And here, and again here, always next to something that appears desperately ordinary." Tommy leaned closer. Estate papers rarely inspire meaningful excitement unless they contain something not meant to be found. And then we have these. Tuppence pointed to the margin of another page where Trevelyan had written initials HL, RT, MG, and B, each accompanied by increasingly frantic question marks. RT, Tommy murmured. Roland Trevelyan himself. Yes, which suggests the others are names he recognized. Or names he feared, Tommy offered. Tuppence gave him a pleased smile. Splendid deduction, darling. He nodded modestly. I have my moments. She turned the catalogue upside down, then sideways, searching for hidden meaning in the scribbles. But a loose object slid out, a torn envelope, paper crisp and yellowed at the edges. She unfolded it to reveal a receipt. Aha, this is for the viewing of a specific item from the locked archive. Lot 47 was only the public portion. He arranged to see something more confidential. Tommy groaned. This is where trouble begins. Secret archive documents always lead to misadventure. Every time. Then we're due one, Tuppence declared. It's been a slow month. The telephone interrupted her triumph. She picked it up with her usual cheerful lilt. Beresford residence. The voice on the other end sounded strained. Mrs. Beresford, this is Mr. Lockridge from the Mayfair auction house. I regret to trouble you further, but... The hesitation hung like a weight. Yes? Tuppence prompted. It appears the lot Mr. Trevelyan viewed this morning, the secure archive item, has gone missing. Tuppence sat straighter. Missing? Removed from the case entirely, no sign of forced entry, and the only fingerprints on the display glass belonged to you and your husband. Tommy, hearing her sharp inhale, moved closer. What is it? Tuppence pressed the receiver tightly. Mr. Lockridge, are you accusing us of theft? Good heavens, no, Lockridge sputtered. Merely informing you of the oddness. I thought you should know. Indeed we should, she said coolly. Thank you. She hung up and turned to Tommy. The lot is gone, and our fingerprints are the only ones found. Tommy sighed. Well, that's marvellous. We help a man avoid being flattened by a taxi, and in return we're implicated in theft. Tuppence paced. The question is, did Trevelyan steal it before he fled, or did someone remove it afterward and arrange for the blame to fall on us? There's also the charming possibility, Tommy said, that Trevelyan planned this entire circus. Tuppence shook her head. No, he didn't look like a man performing theatrics. He looked like a man running from something relentless. A knock at the door interrupted them. Both froze. Tommy whispered, Please tell me it's the postman. But it wasn't. On the floor outside their door lay a folded slip of paper, hand-delivered by someone who had knocked only to alert them. Tuppence stooped to pick it up. It was the torn corner of a photograph, sepia, worn, depicting a group of 4 people standing in front of a nondescript building. The faces were faint, but the figure second from left bore a resemblance to Trevelyan. Beneath the image someone had scrawled, They know you have the catalogue. Tuppence inhaled sharply. Tommy, someone watched us pick this up at the auction house. And now they think we have stolen documents. Wonderful. Tommy rubbed his temples. Why is it never gardening mysteries? I long for a mystery involving an accidental pumpkin. Tuppence ignored his lament. This is deliberate. Logic says Trevelyan dropped the catalogue on purpose, or was forced to, and now someone else believes we know more than we do. Tommy opened the notebook where Tuppence had arranged the clues like battlefield markers. Let's review. We've got a missing archive lot, a man giving false names, initials we can't place, one sinister recurring symbol, and our fingerprints conveniently located at the scene of a theft. Plus, Tuppence added, a man who believes we saved him by mistake. They sat in silence for a moment. The flat felt unusually still, as though listening. Tuppence spoke first. We need to learn who the initials belong to, and what this symbol means. Before whoever knocked returns, Tommy asked. Precisely. Tommy sighed. Then I suppose we're back in the mystery business. Tuppence smiled, and not a moment too soon. As she gathered the catalogue, the torn photograph and the envelope, one final thought crossed her mind, a whisper echoing from Trevelyan's trembling lips. You've ruined everything. She glanced toward the door. Or perhaps, she thought, everything had only just begun. Tommy Beresford was not a man easily startled before breakfast, but the doorbell's aggressive trill at 8 o'clock struck him as a personal insult. He emerged from the bedroom in dressing gown and slippers, muttering about the decline of civilized hours. Tuppence, already awake and reading the catalogue again with the intensity of a codebreaker, looked up over her teacup. "Do answer it, Tommy. Anyone ringing this early must be important." "Or deranged," he countered, but he obeyed. When he opened the door, he half expected to see a constable or perhaps a remorseful Trevelyan attempting another collapse. Instead, a tall, severe woman in her early 50s stood poised on the threshold, wearing a sharply tailored suit and the expression of someone perpetually unimpressed by mortal flaws. "Mr. Beresford?" she asked. "Yes, though I deny all crimes committed before breakfast." The woman did not smile. "I am Mrs. Marjorie Grayling, solicitor's assistant." She handed him a card that looked as rigid as her spine. "I'm here regarding Mr. Roland Trevelyan." Tommy blinked, then stepped aside reluctantly. "You'd better come in before my wife decides I've been kidnapped." Mrs. Grayling entered the sitting room like someone inspecting a property for future legal seizure. Tuppence stood to greet her, polite but alert, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Tuppence asked. Mrs. Grayling placed her handbag on the armchair with ceremonial precision. "Mr. Trevelyan contacted me last week. He feared," she inhaled primly, "that mistaken friends might intervene in matters beyond their understanding." Tuppence arched a brow. "Mistaken friends? How unflattering. We haven't known him long enough to be mistaken anything." "You intervened yesterday," Mrs. Grayling replied coldly. "He did not want help. He made that abundantly clear." Tommy folded his arms. "Forgive us for preventing his preferred method of self-destruction. It's frightfully rude to die in front of strangers." Mrs. Grayling's lips tightened a fraction, but she pressed on. "Mr. Trevelyan is involved in sensitive affairs that do not concern you. He feared interference from well-meaning amateurs." Tuppence instantly bristled. Amateur is a fighting word in this household. "I merely relay his wishes," Mrs. Grayling said. "He believed strangers might misinterpret his actions and upset delicate arrangements." "What sort of arrangements?" Tuppence asked pleasantly, which was her tone, for I'm about to dismantle your story piece by piece. Mrs. Grayling hesitated. It was small but unmistakable. "Historical matters," she said carefully. "From an old foreign affair, political sabotage, betrayal and other events best left buried. Mr. Trevelyan has been tracking someone involved. I cannot say more." "You've said quite a lot already," Tuppence murmured. Mrs. Grayling rose abruptly, gathering her bag. "In any case, I urge you to disengage. Your curiosity may place you in danger." Tommy escorted her to the door. "Solicitors rarely scold strangers unless they're rattled," he remarked once she was gone. "Exactly." Tuppence tapped her chin. "She knows more than she intended to reveal." "And did you notice?" She slipped on the phrase, "old foreign affair," almost as though Trevelyan wasn't the only one involved. Tommy sat heavily beside her. "We're dealing with something bigger than a panicked man at an auction." A knock on the doorframe announced Albert, their longtime ally and now the self-appointed guardian of the building's security desk. He stepped into their sitting room with a grin. "Saw a real looker heading out just now. Sharp as a pin, that one. But I came to tell you something better. There's been a fellow hanging around the building for days." "Describe him," Tuppence said quickly. Albert waggled his eyebrows. Tallish chap, thinning hair, nervous eyes. Looked a bit like he'd misplaced his life. Kept pacing near the service entrance. When I asked him what he wanted, he nearly jumped out of his skin. "That sounds very much like Trevelyan," Tommy said. Albert nodded. "Thought so. He was here before all this business yesterday." Tuppence exchanged a meaningful glance with Tommy. He was watching us, before we even met him. "No crime in watching," Albert added, "but I don't like the look of him staring at the mailboxes 3 nights in a row." "Good work, Albert," Tuppence said. "Keep an eye out for anyone else lurking." "With pleasure." Albert saluted and vanished back to his post, humming with the satisfaction of being useful. Tuppence took up the catalogue again. Trevelyan was tracking someone from his past, and Mrs. Grayling wants us away from the matter with suspicious urgency. Tommy nodded grimly, which means we ought to get closer. They wasted no time. Within the hour they arrived at the discreet clinic where Trevelyan had been taken. A nurse ushered them into a softly lit corridor, her expression troubled. "We're here to see Mr. Trevelyan," Tuppence said gently. The nurse's fingers tightened around her clipboard. "He left. He checked in under a false name," she added quietly. "Edwin Turner. But it was obvious he was hiding from someone, not from us." "Left?" Tommy repeated. He couldn't stand without wobbling like a newborn colt. "He insisted," she whispered, after a visitor came. "Mrs. Grayling?" Tuppence guessed. The nurse nodded. She spoke to him privately. He grew agitated, said he had to go immediately. We tried to stop him, but he threatened to make a scene. "And what did he say as he left?" Tuppence asked. The nurse swallowed. "Just one thing. He said, if they try to help again, they'll end up saving the wrong man." I didn't understand. Neither did they, but the warning lodged deep. Tuppence thanked her and stepped outside with Tommy into the quiet street. The city noises seemed oddly distant, muffled by the weight of revelation. "Someone is manipulating him," Tommy said, "pushing him out of safe places, pushing him toward panic." "Or pushing him toward us," Tuppence murmured. "He shadowed our home. He left the catalogue. He watched us after fleeing. Someone wants him afraid and wants us entangled." Tommy tucked his hands into his pockets. "I dislike being entangled before tea." But Tuppence wasn't listening. She stared thoughtfully at the pavement. "Trevelyan fears misidentification. Saving the wrong man. That implies there's a right one." "A dangerous one," Tommy added. When they returned home, a parcel sat neatly at their door. No address, no stamps, simply wrapped, tied with string. Tuppence untied it carefully. Something soft slid into her hands. Fabric, old and stiffened by time. She unfolded it. A shred of foreign military uniform. The colour was faded, but the stitching remained crisp. On the inner lining, unmistakably embroidered, was the same symbol Trevelyan had drawn in the catalogue, a circle with a single slash. Tommy stared. "Well," he murmured, "we've just received a souvenir from someone's battlefield." Tuppence's voice dropped to a whisper. "He sent us proof. Proof of whatever this old foreign affair was. And he wants us to understand," Tommy said, "or warn us. Or both." Tuppence folded the cloth carefully. "Trevelyan is running from something with a symbol, and someone with that symbol is running toward us." The room felt briefly colder, though not a draught stirred. Tommy straightened his shoulders. "So the stakes have risen." Tuppence nodded. "And we must find out who the wrong man is, before we save him too." The parcel lay between them, small yet heavy with implications. And somewhere in London, Roland Trevelyan moved like a hunted shadow, caught between the past he fled and the strangers he had unwillingly drawn into its deadly orbit. The morning began not with breakfast, nor with Tommy's usual muttering over cold toast, but with Tuppence pointing at the catalogue spread across their table like a battle map. Her eyes were bright, her posture that of a general prepared for engagement. "We're missing the obvious," she declared. Tommy, still fastening his cufflinks with the air of a man who had not asked for this degree of excitement, sighed. "I'm certain you'll tell me." These initials must belong to people Trevelyan knew intimately, and not just in passing. They were written with agitation, HL and MG especially. She tapped the letters with a pencil. "We need records. Proper ones." Tommy blinked. "You want to visit a veteran's archive before I've even had a second cup of tea?" "Yes," she said briskly. "Danger doesn't wait for tea, though I might bring a thermos next time." Before he could object further, they were out the door, down the stairs, and into a taxi heading toward an unassuming government building tucked between offices and bookstores, its facade grey, forgettable, intentionally so. The brass plaque read, "Veterans Records, Special Branch Retired Personnel." Inside, a clerk with round spectacles and an expression of bureaucratic despair greeted them. He seemed to find their request, information about a symbol and 4 sets of initials, first tedious, then inconvenient, and finally deeply troubling. "A circle with a slash," he murmured, rubbing his chin. "Not a regiment insignia. Not military at all," he lowered his voice. "Not officially, that is." Tuppence leaned forward. "Meaning?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm they were on the right trail. Then he reached under the desk and withdrew a thin, dusty ledger with a plain brown cover, a book that seemed to breathe secrecy. "You didn't get this here," he warned. "Consider me temporarily blind," Tuppence replied. He flipped through the brittle pages until he found the symbol, hand-drawn in ink that had faded to a ghostly grey. Beside it, 4 names were listed. During the early Cold War, the clerk said, there existed a resistance cell, entirely off the books, their operations erased from history. They were informally called, he paused for effect, the 4 who never were. Tommy straightened. That sounds thoroughly ominous. It was meant to be, the clerk replied. Their assignments were the sort one doesn't admit to, even decades later. He tapped the ledger. H.L., Harold Linton, former intelligence courier, believed dead. Tuppence shot Tommy a look. R.T., Roland Trevelyan. Tommy exhaled slowly. Explains the panic. M.G., Marjorie Grayling. Tuppence's eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Grayling? The very same, the clerk confirmed. She was their liaison, responsible for communication, cover identities, false papers, very intelligent woman, ruthless reputation. And B? Tuppence asked. Unknown, the clerk said. The real identity was never recorded. Believed dead, though rumours suggest they were the most dangerous of the 4. Tuppence felt a shiver of revelation. Trevelyan wrote the initials in fear, not nostalgia. The clerk nodded. They made a grave error once, rescued a man during an extraction mission, believed him to be an ally, only later learned he was a double agent responsible for several assassinations across Europe. Saved the enemy by mistake, Tommy murmured. Exactly. The mistake nearly cost them their lives, and worst of all, it was never officially corrected. The truth remained buried. Tuppence inhaled sharply. Someone has begun unearthing it. Yes, the clerk said. And if history is waking up, be careful. These people operated in shadows. Shadows rarely forgive daylight. They thanked him and left. The icy weight of understanding followed them into the street. Tommy paused at the curb. So, Trevelyan wasn't simply frightened. He was hunted. And Mrs. Grayling visited him before he vanished, Tuppence added. She's not just a solicitor. She's part of the same cell. Tommy frowned. But Trevelyan feared being recognized. Recognized by whom? Her? Or someone else? The unknown B? Tuppence recalled the torn photograph with 4 blurred figures. The 4th operative, the one marked only as B, might still be alive. Or someone wants us to think so, Tommy said. Either option is dreadful. They crossed the quiet street toward their next lead, bound for the archive's secondary offices. The air carried the muffled hum of vehicles, footsteps, and the distant shout of a vendor. But beneath it all, Tuppence felt a prickle of unease, a precise sound, a faint mechanical whir. "Tuppence!" Tommy shouted. She turned just in time to see a motorbike, black, compact, and speeding directly toward them. No engine roar, no exhaust sputter. Silenced, deliberate. The rider's helmet visor reflected nothing but cold intention. Tommy yanked her backward as the bike shot past, missing her by inches. The gust of displaced air tugged at her skirt. "Good heavens," Tommy gasped. "That was no accident." The rider braked sharply 3 meters ahead, skidding just long enough to glance over a shoulder. Then, with a metallic snarl, he sped off, weaving into traffic so smoothly that he seemed to dissolve into the city itself. Tuppence steadied her breath. "Someone doesn't want us learning more." "That narrows the suspect list to several dangerous individuals," Tommy replied. "How comforting." Pedestrians gathered, whispering, but Tuppence stepped away from them, scanning the pavement. Something had fallen near the curb, glass curved and fractured, a piece of the motorbike's headlamp. She crouched and picked it up. The shard fit neatly in her palm. Though cracked, the back surface bore a freshly etched mark, the circle with the slash. Tuppence stared at it, pulse quickening. "Look, Tommy," he leaned in. "That's the same symbol from the catalogue, and from the uniform. Freshly engraved, not scratched accidentally, not part of the manufacturer's design. A message," Tuppence whispered. "Direct and taunting." "Or a warning," Tommy added grimly. They stood at the edge of the street, the world continuing obliviously around them. For a moment, Tuppence felt the past reaching through time. Old betrayals, buried crimes, forgotten operatives rising like restless ghosts. Tommy placed a steadying hand on her elbow. "Someone wants to frighten us." "But they've miscalculated," she said softly, "because now I'm certain of something." Tommy raised a brow. "What?" "That Trevelyan wasn't warning us away. He was warning us forward. He said we'd save the wrong man, which means the right one is still out there. She turned the glass shard in her hand. And someone is desperately trying to keep us from finding him. They walked on, faster now, their path leading back toward the main road where they could hail a taxi. The day remained ordinary around them, buses rumbling, shop doors chiming, the smell of pastries drifting from a bakery across the street. Yet beneath these everyday rhythms, Tuppence sensed danger woven like a hidden thread. She looked once more at the shard. The etched symbol glinted, mocking and bold. "The 4 who never were," she murmured. 3 known, 1 unknown. "And 1," Tommy added, "who may not be dead after all." A taxi stopped to pick them up. Tommy opened the door for her. As she stepped inside, Tuppence felt the weight of the glass shard in her pocket. Not heavy, not sharp, but powerful. A clue from a ghost who refused to stay buried. As the taxi joined the river of London traffic, neither of them noticed the dark motorbike following from a distance, its rider silent, patient, and marked with the same circle and slash symbol that now bound their fate to a story written decades before they were ever meant to read it. The junior archivist looked as though he'd been caught smuggling crown jewels in his waistcoat. His spectacles slid dangerously down his nose, his fingers trembled over the ledger, and his nervous glances toward the security door did nothing to inspire confidence. Tuppence had seen less guilt in smugglers on the Riviera. "I shouldn't be showing you this," he whispered, though he had already shown them half of it. The missing lot, Lot A47, wasn't supposed to leave the archive room. Tommy leaned against a polished cabinet with the relaxed posture of a man accustomed to coaxing the truth from reluctant witnesses. "And yet it has, curiously enough, after our friend Trevelyan viewed it." The archivist flinched at the name. "We've had special instructions regarding that lot." He swallowed hard. Its contents were sealed under the national interest provision. "Which usually means," Tuppence said lightly, "that the contents are scandalous, dangerous, or embarrassingly mundane. In this case, I vote for the first 2. The archivist darted a look toward the chief office door. It was a folder of letters, old ones, some coded, some fragments of rendezvous instructions, and one final note, unsigned. He lowered his voice further. "That's the one Mr. Trevelyan came to see." "Why that one?" Tommy asked. "He said it was the only piece that mattered." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance. That one unsigned letter, whatever it contained, had been the catalyst for Trevelyan's terror. "And the seller?" Tuppence probed. "Classified," the archivist said quickly. "All I know is that the lot arrived with government seals. The seller's identity was redacted in every document." "That's convenient," Tommy muttered. "And the lot?" Tuppence pressed. The archivist wrung his hands. "Gone. Removed from the case entirely. No break-in, no forced lock, just gone." He swallowed again. "And your fingerprints were the only ones found." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "We do love to be involved in things we haven't done." The archivist paled so dramatically that Tuppence took pity on him and ushered Tommy out. As they stepped into the marble corridor, Tommy crossed his arms. "Well, that clarifies absolutely nothing except our growing list of enemies." "It clarifies plenty," Tuppence countered. "Trevelyan came for a specific document. Mrs. Grayling visited him before he vanished from the clinic, and now this mysterious lot has disappeared." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning Mrs. Grayling has the documents." He considered this. "You think she took them herself?" "She knew exactly what Trevelyan feared." Tuppence's tone sharpened. "She even tried to warn us away. That's always step 1 in the 'I'm hiding something important' handbook." "It's true we've been warned more often than I'm comfortable with," Tommy conceded. "Considerably more." Tuppence pulled out her notebook. "There's only one sensible course of action." Tommy groaned. "You're going to say it, aren't you?" "We're going to search her office." Her smile was bright and determined. Tommy sighed but followed. He always did. Mrs. Grayling's solicitor's office occupied a respectable building on Brook Street, respectable in the sense that nothing illegal had been proven there recently. Tuppence approached the reception desk with a confident smile. "We have an appointment with Mrs. Grayling," she announced. The receptionist checked her book. "I don't see—" Behind her, Albert burst through the front door wearing a postman's cap, waving a large envelope and calling, "Urgent parcel delivery for Miss Springfield. Sign immediately or I'll lose my position." The receptionist jumped from her seat. "Miss Springfield works on the top floor. Oh dear, please wait." She vanished upstairs, leaving her desk defenseless. Tommy whispered, "Albert's chaos has become quite refined over the years." "Practice makes perfect," Tuppence replied as she slipped behind the desk, through the private door and into Mrs. Grayling's office. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. Every paper squared, every pen aligned, every file stacked with ruler-like precision. But the air carried a faint, sharp smell. "Smoke," Tuppence murmured. "Paper smoke. Very recent." Tommy scanned the room. "Nothing's out of place, except—" He opened the safe behind the desk. Its door hung ajar an inch, as if carelessly closed in a hurry. Tuppence stepped closer, inhaling the faint burn still clinging to its interior. She destroyed something. Tommy examined the edges. A document, several sheets perhaps, burnt inside the safe. Tuppence knelt and peered inside. "Look, something's caught behind the grate." She used a letter opener to retrieve a tiny fragment curled like a charred leaf. She straightened it gently. Text remained, ragged, incomplete. The last 4 letters. Well. Tommy frowned. That could be dozens of names. "Or one extremely important one," Tuppence said softly. They searched the room quickly but thoroughly. No other scraps, no hidden documents. Mrs. Grayling had been meticulous. Tuppence stood. "This isn't just destruction, it's erasure." "And very timely erasure," Tommy added. "What if the missing letter in the lot contained proof, either that Trevelyan was innocent or guilty?" And Mrs. Grayling determined which version we'll never see. Before they could discuss further, Albert's voice echoed down the hall. "Miss Springfield signed 5 times. Do I get a bonus?" Tuppence slipped the scrap into her pocket. "Time to go." They exited just as the receptionist reappeared, slightly flushed and trying to regain composure. "She says she wasn't expecting—" "Oh, you're leaving?" "Yes," Tuppence said brightly. "Do tell Mrs. Grayling we stopped by." Their exit was graceful. The receptionist did not suspect a thing. Albert, however, couldn't resist winking theatrically. Back home, Tommy paced across the sitting room while Tuppence studied the charred scrap beneath a magnifying glass. "It ends in well," she murmured, "as in Blackwell, Hartwell, Boswell, or perhaps part of a longer word. Farewell, Roswell, even Maxwell." "Or Burwell," Tommy suggested idly. Tuppence froze. "Why Burwell?" "Just sounds plausible. Grayling, Burwell. They both have that clipped British firmness." Tuppence sat back slowly. "Burwell. If her maiden name was Burwell, that would make MG the same initials, and B could be her original initial." Tommy nodded. "Meaning she could have been hiding behind dual identities for decades." Tuppence drummed her fingers on the table. "That makes her more dangerous than Trevelyan implied." Tommy sighed. "And now we're working with incomplete clues." "The oldest form of mystery," Tuppence replied. "We'll manage." Their banter softened for a moment, warm, familiar, the rhythm of 2 people who had solved a lifetime of troubles together. But beneath it, fear lingered. "Tommy," Tuppence said quietly, "what if the destroyed document was the only thing proving Trevelyan's innocence? Then someone wants him condemned. And if it proved his guilt," Tommy looked at her gravely, "then someone wants him protected." Before she could answer, Tuppence rose and walked to the window. "Something's wrong." Tommy joined her. The street below looked normal, but Tuppence pointed to a subtle detail. Their curtains, slightly parted. "I closed those," she whispered. In 3 swift strides she reached the catalogue on the table. She opened it. The pages had been moved. Not much. Just enough to prove someone had touched it. Tommy scanned the room. "Nothing's missing." "No," Tuppence said. "They only wanted to send a message." "A warning," Tommy muttered. The room suddenly felt smaller, watched, poised on the edge of danger. Tuppence's heart tightened. Someone was here, and they wanted us to know it. They checked every room. Nothing stolen, no forced entry. But the quiet, deliberate rearrangement felt far more sinister than theft. As they stood in the doorway, shaken but resolute, a shadow moved near the building entrance below. Tuppence stepped closer. "Tommy, look." Outside, under the dim street lamp, stood Roland Trevelyan, his hair dishevelled, coat hanging loosely, chest rising with rapid breaths. He looked like a man standing on the last thread of sanity. The moment he saw them at the window, he lifted a trembling hand. "Don't!" he shouted up, his voice cracked in terror. "Stop searching! Stop before the wrong person pays the old debt!" Then he staggered back into darkness. Tommy whispered, "He's unravelling." "No," Tuppence said softly, her gaze fixed on the place he'd vanished. "He's trying to hold everything together before someone else rips it apart." She watched the empty street, the lingering echo of Trevelyan's desperate warning settling over her like an unfinished sentence. Something terrible from the past was resurfacing, and now, she knew, someone was about to pay the price. Roland Trevelyan looked like a man held together by borrowed breath. He stood beneath the dim street lamp outside the Beresfords' building, shoulders hunched, coat clinging to him like a damp shadow. His eyes flicked toward every passing pedestrian, every shifting silhouette, every possible hiding place of a pursuing enemy. When he saw Tommy and Tuppence approaching, he visibly sagged, not in relief but in exhaustion, as though fear had finally outrun his strength. Tuppence approached slowly. "Mr. Trevelyan, you sent for us." Trevelyan pressed a shaking hand to the wall, steadying himself. "I didn't know where else to go." His voice was hoarse, marked by sleeplessness and panic. "I need to speak before someone else speaks for me." Tommy opened the door to the lobby. "Inside, quickly." They guided him upstairs to their sitting room, where the faint warmth of the lamp contrasted starkly with Trevelyan's chill. He sank into the armchair, clutching its arms like a lifeline. Tuppence poured him tea, though he barely noticed the cup in his hand. For several moments, only his harsh breaths filled the room. Then he began. "It was 27 years ago," he said. "Cold War years. Everything was lies inside lies. They sent 4 of us, Harold Linton, Marjorie Grayling, myself, and one known only as B. Even we didn't know the real name, only that B claimed to possess intelligence that would expose a widespread betrayal in the Allied network." Tommy exchanged a quick glance with Tuppence. Trevelyan stared into the steam rising from his untouched tea. "We were to intercept him near the border, but the operation turned to chaos. Gunfire, a car overturned, flames everywhere. Someone screamed orders, I don't even know who. We dragged a man from the burning vehicle, half-conscious, face bloodied. We believed it was B." Tuppence leaned forward. "But it wasn't." Trevelyan's nod was slow, weighted. "We rescued the wrong man. The real B escaped, and the man we saved, who we thought was a courier, vanished after recovering. Later we learned he wasn't our ally. He was the double agent responsible for several assassinations. We saved him. We let the true traitor go free." He trembled. "It ruined everything. Our careers, our reputations, our lives. Officially, we never existed. Unofficially, we were blamed for every death he caused afterward." Tuppence's voice softened. "That mistake has haunted you." "Haunted?" Trevelyan laughed weakly. "It devoured us. Harold buried himself in false identities. Marjorie became someone else entirely. And me. I tried to rebuild my life under another name, but it followed me." He swallowed hard. "Last week I received a message. No return address, no signature. Only one sentence. The enemy you saved returns for the final reckoning." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Meaning the man you mistakenly rescued is alive and hunting you?" Trevelyan nodded. "I thought so at first, but then I realized it might be worse." Tuppence frowned. "Worse?" Trevelyan pressed a hand to his forehead. "Someone is rewriting the story. Someone from our group, either Harold or Marjorie. One of them is altering history to frame me as the traitor, to claim I was the defector who escaped, not the one they saved. They want to correct the record by destroying me." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "And the missing archive documents?" Trevelyan looked up sharply. "You found out?" "It wasn't difficult," Tommy said dryly. "We've been blamed for the theft." "Marjorie," Trevelyan whispered. "She's hiding something. She visited me at the clinic, told me to disappear, said truth was dangerous. She destroyed part of the confession letter." Tuppence stood abruptly. "So the letter in lot A47 contained proof of your innocence or guilt?" Trevelyan shook his head violently. I never saw it. I only knew it existed. I came to the auction to see the one unsigned confession note, but she took it before I could. Tommy narrowed his eyes. But earlier, when you were rambling last night, you mentioned a location, a safe house outside Berlin. You described it, in detail. Trevelyan froze. Tuppence's voice was quiet but piercing. How did you know the location if you never saw the full letter? Trevelyan's breath hitched. I must have remembered it from before. You said you never knew where the traitor fled, Tommy cut in. Your exact words. Trevelyan looked trapped. Words failed him. His gaze darted toward the window as though searching for an escape route. Tuppence stepped closer. Mr. Trevelyan, are you lying to us? He shot to his feet. No, I'm telling you the truth. My mind, my memory, it's shattered. Everything's mixed. I don't know what I know anymore. Or what you shouldn't know, Tommy murmured. Trevelyan staggered toward the door. I need air. Someone is watching me. They always are. They always have been. If it wasn't Harold, if it wasn't Marjorie, maybe it was both. Maybe... A flicker through the window froze him mid-sentence. A figure across the street. Motionless. Watching. Trevelyan's eyes widened in absolute terror. No, he breathed. Not now. Not here. Before they could stop him, he bolted down the stairs. Tommy and Tuppence rushed after him, but Trevelyan burst into the street, stumbling, gasping, glancing everywhere at once. Trevelyan! Tommy shouted. Wait! Trevelyan turned toward the opposite pavement where the shadowy figure stood. He took one step, and a gunshot cracked like the world splitting open. Trevelyan crumpled. Tuppence screamed. Tommy dashed to him, dropping to his knees beside the fallen man. Trevelyan lay on his side, clutching his abdomen, breath coming in ragged, drowning gulps. Blood seeped between his fingers. Tuppence knelt on his other side. Mr. Trevelyan, stay with us. His eyelids fluttered, struggling against darkness. His voice emerged in a rasp barely human. It wasn't one enemy. Tommy leaned in. Who, Trevelyan? Who? Trevelyan coughed, blood staining his lips. It was two. His body slackened. His eyes closed. But his chest still rose, shallow, barely there. He was alive, but only just. Tommy pressed his coat over the wound to staunch the bleeding. Tuppence, call for help! She ran. Tommy held Trevelyan's hand, jaw clenched, fury rising like fire. Across the street the figure had vanished, as though swallowed by the night itself. Moments later, Tuppence returned with a constable and a passer-by who claimed some medical training. They lifted Trevelyan onto makeshift supports, stemming the worst of the bleeding. As Trevelyan was carried toward an arriving ambulance, Tuppence whispered, 2 enemies, working together, or 2 versions of one past. Tommy shook his head. Either way, this wasn't random. Someone has tried twice to kill him. Tuppence stared at the empty street corner where the shooter had stood. And the next attempt, she murmured, won't be for Trevelyan. Tommy exhaled sharply. They're accelerating. Whatever is coming, it's coming fast. The ambulance doors closed with a metallic thud. Trevelyan was whisked away into the night, his fate uncertain. Tommy placed an arm around Tuppence's shoulders. Back upstairs. We need to think. But as they turned toward the building, something glinted on the pavement. Tuppence stooped and picked it up. A tiny metal disc. Cold. Smooth. Inscribed with a symbol. A circle with a slash. She closed her hand around it. Tommy, she whispered. They were here. No, Tommy said darkly, scanning the shadows. They still are. Tommy Beresford tapped the thin file twice with the end of his pen, as if the poor document might suddenly confess its secrets under pressure. A man can only die once, he announced. It's one of the things I've always appreciated about death. Its tidy finality. Tuppence looked up sharply from her notepad. Unless he doesn't. The two of them sat at the breakfast table, which had long since stopped being a place for eggs and toast, and had instead become a chaotic headquarters of scribbled clues, torn envelopes, and ominously marked catalogues. Trevelyan's gunshot injury still hung over the air like an unspoken warning. He had been taken to a private hospital under police guard, unconscious and in no condition to speak. They were more alone in their investigation than ever. Harold Linton, Tuppence said thoughtfully, officially deceased for 10 years, yet every time someone insists on a fact with that much confidence, I begin to suspect the opposite. Tommy opened the burial record again. Here it is. Deceased cremated, ashes scattered in the Lake District. Clear as day. Except the crematorium has no record of performing it, Tuppence said, and the undertaker retired with a sudden inheritance. Curious coincidence. Tommy leaned back. We need to visit Linton's old address. Already planned. Tuppence stood, gathering her handbag like a general collecting a sword. The sooner we confirm he's dead, or inconveniently alive, the better. Linton's supposed residence was a converted townhouse on a quiet side street in Hampstead, with blooming window boxes and the respectable hush of a place where scandals were frowned upon, but undoubtedly existed. An elderly woman answered their knock. Her expression brightened at the sight of visitors. She seemed the sort with an appetite for conversation. "Ah, you're here about Harold," she said before they could introduce themselves. Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "We are indeed. We were old acquaintances." "Well, you just missed him. Moved out months ago." Tommy blinked. Pardon? The records list him as deceased." "Oh, that." The woman waved a dismissive hand. "Fanciful administrative nonsense. Harold was alive as you or me. Very private man, though. Said he didn't trust the people who were cleaning up history. Odd phrase, that." "Did he give a reason for moving?" Tuppence asked. "He said it was safer elsewhere." She lowered her voice. "He was always glancing over his shoulder, poor soul. You'd think he expected someone from his past to jump out of a wardrobe." Tuppence's mind sharpened. Did he leave anything behind? "Just an old wardrobe in the attic. Said it belonged to the previous tenant." Her eyes twinkled. "But I never believed him." Moments later, they stood in the narrow attic among dusty boxes and trunks. The wardrobe was large, dark, and carved with swirling patterns. Inside, the shelves were nearly bare except for a small tin box tucked into a corner. Tuppence opened it. Tommy. Inside were coded notes, rows of letters and numbers, familiar to anyone who had handled Trevelyan's catalogue scribbles. Names, initials, dates. One page listed a timeline of targeted political killings across Europe, incidents spanning 20 years. They were neatly numbered, each accompanied by a cryptic notation. "He tracked them," Tommy whispered. "Every assassination committed by the double agent they rescued. He followed the real traitor's trail." "Or," Tuppence said quietly, "he committed them." Tommy looked alarmed. "Surely not. We can't rule it out. He was part of the original cell. He might have become obsessed with correcting the mistake by eliminating loose ends." She tapped another card. "Or he might have tried desperately to stop the traitor and failed." Tommy exhaled. "Harold Linton. Hero or ghost?" Tuppence closed the box. "We need answers, and unfortunately, only Harold can give them." As they climbed down the attic stairs, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Albert." "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." Tommy frowned. "Did something happen?" "Something? Someone," Albert said breathlessly. "The chap on the motorbike, the one who tried to flatten you two the other day, he's back, and he's following you." Tuppence stiffened. "Where?" "Down the street. Black visor helmet, same bike, parked outside the bakery, pretending to read a paper." Tommy squared his shoulders. "Time to turn the tables, I think." Tuppence nodded. "Let's not allow him to choose the battleground." They walked calmly toward the bakery, side by side, their posture casual but their senses poised. Albert trailed discreetly behind, ready to assist, or at least shout dramatically, if needed. The man on the motorbike sat near the pavement, helmet on, head lowered as though focusing on a newspaper. But Tommy noticed the tension in his shoulders, the slight twitch of his boot. Tuppence noticed the small bulge inside his jacket that suggested something far from benign. When they were 5 paces away, the man abruptly stood and bolted toward the alley. "After him!" Tuppence shouted. They ran. Albert whooped with excitement. Tommy lunged forward with unexpected athleticism for a man whose usual exercise consisted of avoiding adventurous situations. The man turned into a narrow lane between buildings, but he had miscalculated. Tommy tackled him from behind, both of them crashing to the ground. The helmet rolled aside. Not Harold Linton. A young man, barely in his 20s, face sharp, frightened, and defiant. "Let me go," he gasped. "You don't understand." "Oh, we understand plenty," Tommy said, pinning him by the shoulder. Tuppence knelt, eyes cool. You've tried to harm us twice." "I wasn't trying to harm you. I was trying to warn you. He said you'd be targets if you kept digging." "Who said?" Tuppence demanded. The young man pressed his lips together, trembling. Then slowly he reached into his jacket. Albert squeaked and leapt backward behind a rubbish bin. But the young man didn't pull out a weapon. He withdrew a small velvet pouch. Inside were Harold Linton's war medals. Tommy stared. "Where did you get these?" "They're mine," the young man whispered. "He gave them to me." Tuppence's eyes widened. "You knew Harold, personally?" "He's alive," the young man said. "Alive and hiding, and he begged me to keep watch for anyone asking questions about him." "Why tail us?" Tommy said sharply. "You were seen with Trevelyan. Harold said Trevelyan might expose him, that Trevelyan blamed him for the past. He told me to stay close, but not to let you know." "But why try to run us down?" Tuppence pressed. "I didn't," he exclaimed. "I wasn't driving that day. That was someone else. I followed Trevelyan last night. I saw the shooter, but I couldn't get close enough." He swallowed. Harold said the old betrayal wasn't what it seemed. Tuppence exchanged a quick look with Tommy. "What exactly did Harold tell you?" she asked. The young man hesitated. He said he wasn't the traitor. He said he was the only one who tried to stop B, but he failed, and the guilt ate him alive." Tommy's voice softened. "Where is he now?" "I won't betray him," the young man said fiercely. "He's all the family I have." Tuppence's tone shifted, gentle, persuasive. "We don't want to hurt him, but someone has already tried to kill Trevelyan. If Harold is involved, even as a target, his life is in danger." The young man's resolve cracked. His eyes glistened. He knew this day would come. He slowly reached into his pocket. "He told me that if anyone ever found me, I should give them this." He held out a sealed envelope. Tuppence took it with care. The paper was thick, the seal unbroken. Her heart beat faster as she opened it. Inside was a single torn page, its edges jagged, scorched along one side. Tommy whispered, "Part of the missing auction lot." Tuppence held it to the light. The handwriting was unmistakably old. Deliberate strokes, tense letters, the hand of a man writing under duress. A fragment of confession. "We trusted the wrong shadow. B was closer than any of us knew." Below it, a separate line written in Harold's hand. "Look to the one who hides in plain sight." Tuppence exhaled slowly. "Tommy, this changes everything." Tommy frowned. "Mrs. Grayling hides in plain sight." "So does Trevelyan under a false name," Tuppence countered. "And possibly the fourth operative, if alive, could be using an identity right under our noses." Albert leaned in anxiously. "So, who's the villain then?" Tuppence folded the page carefully. "That, Albert, is what the next step will reveal." The young man wiped his face. "I didn't want to be part of this. He told me to disappear if things got dangerous, but I couldn't leave him." "We understand," Tuppence said softly. "You've done the right thing." "Do you promise," he whispered, "you'll find the truth, not just the story they want told?" Tuppence placed a hand on his shoulder. "I promise." Tommy stood, his expression grim but resolute. "Let's get him somewhere safe. And then, Tuppence finished, "we find Harold." She slipped Harold's warning into her coat pocket. "Look to the one who hides in plain sight." The phrase echoed through her mind as they walked back toward the main street. Someone from the past was still alive. Someone was rewriting the story. Someone had turned a four-person cell into a decades-long shadow war. And the truth, Tuppence realized, was no longer hiding in old documents or burned letters. The truth was walking among them, right now, unseen, unimagined, but very much alive. Tuppence had barely turned the key in the door when she sensed it. An odd stillness inside their flat, the kind one associates with a person sitting perfectly composed and waiting to be acknowledged. She exchanged the smallest glance with Tommy. Not fear, just that alert, feline readiness that years of marriage and mystery had honed to perfection. Tommy pushed open the door. Mrs. Marjorie Grayling sat serenely on their sofa, gloves neatly folded on her lap, posture impeccable, like a governess waiting to grade their manners. Albert hovered awkwardly nearby, hat in hand, as if he'd been caught escorting royalty. "She said she were as polite as Parliament," Albert whispered, retreating. so I let her in. Mrs. Grayling inclined her head. "Thank you, Albert. You may go." Albert fled. Tuppence removed her gloves slowly, deliberately. "Mrs. Grayling, you seem comfortable." "I assumed you would prefer my visit to another unnecessary chase across London." Mrs. Grayling's voice was low, poised. "After all, we are aligned more than you realize." Tommy leaned against the desk. "We'll decide that once we hear why you're here uninvited." "I am here," Mrs. Grayling said calmly, "to give you the truth Trevelyan could not." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Could not or would not?" "Both," Mrs. Grayling replied smoothly. She placed her handbag beside her and folded her hands with an air of patient authority. "You know about our cell," she began. "The four who never were: Harold Linton, Roland Trevelyan, myself, and finally, B." Tuppence watched her closely. Not her words, the tiny muscles around her eyes. Mrs. Grayling continued, "For years we suspected the truth. B was never an outsider. The traitor was one of us." She paused. "The very reason our mission failed was because we trusted the wrong person within the group." Tommy frowned. "Trevelyan said something entirely different." "Trevelyan," Mrs. Grayling said with soft disdain, "has been rewriting his own memory for decades. Guilt does that. He believes he is hunted by the man we mistakenly rescued." She shook her head. "Fantasy. The real danger has always been internal." "And Harold?" Tuppence asked gently. Mrs. Grayling's expression darkened for the first time. Harold's mind fractured under the weight of that suspicion. He began chasing ghosts, seeing conspiracies, blaming Trevelyan, blaming me, blaming everyone but himself. Tommy exchanged a subtle look with Tuppence. Mrs. Grayling's version was polished, too polished. "You destroyed the auction documents," Tuppence said quietly. Mrs. Grayling straightened. "Yes, to protect the living. Some truths, Mrs. Beresford, are better left in ash. Entire governments could unravel if the full account emerged." Tommy folded his arms. "Convenient." "I have served my country," Mrs. Grayling said, "not my ego. Those papers contained half-truths written by shattered men attempting to absolve themselves." Her eyes hardened. "Trevelyan orchestrated the return of the lot. He wanted to frame Harold posthumously. That man will burn down history to save himself." Tuppence kneeled by the side table, adjusting a lamp that didn't need adjusting. She used the motion to observe Mrs. Grayling's wrists. There it was, a faint heart-shaped burn, exactly where survivors of the original explosion had been marked by shrapnel. "Interesting," Tuppence murmured. Mrs. Grayling's eyes narrowed. "Is something the matter?" "That mark," Tuppence said casually. "Trevelyan mentioned survivors of the explosion bore something similar." "It was a long time ago," Mrs. Grayling replied. "Yes," Tuppence said softly. "And yet your account doesn't match his, nor does it match Harold's." "Harold is dead." "No," Tommy said, "he's not." Mrs. Grayling blinked. The tiniest crack. Tuppence caught it, filed it, and smiled. "I imagine his being alive complicates your version considerably." Mrs. Grayling rose. "You are meddling in affairs far beyond you. I warn you, for your own safety, stop pursuing this." Tuppence tilted her head. "Odd, that's the third warning we've received. One usually warns only when they're afraid of what someone will find." Mrs. Grayling picked up her gloves. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. I trust you will make sensible choices." She left without a backward glance. The moment the door clicked shut, Tommy exhaled long and slow. "She's lying." "Oh, undoubtedly," Tuppence said. "The question is how much." They sat, the silence around them vibrating with clashing truths. Trevelyan believed the traitor was an outsider. Harold believed the traitor was one of them. Mrs. Grayling believed the traitor story was a tool, used and misused as needed. All three accounts intersected just enough to be dangerous. Tuppence spread their notes on the table. "Let's see what remains consistent." Tommy examined the coded initials. RT, HL, MG, and B. Tuppence tapped her pencil. "If B was not an outsider, then B corresponds to someone whose name begins with B, and the fragment of the destroyed letter ends with, well." Tommy nodded. "Burwell." Mrs. Marjorie Grayling, born Marjorie Burwell, Tuppence said, before she reinvented herself after the fiasco. Tommy sank back. So she fits the name. She has the burn from the explosion. She destroyed the documents. She visited Trevelyan before he vanished from the clinic. And, Tuppence added, she was the only one with access to the missing lot before Harold's page resurfaced. Tommy rubbed his jaw. Could Mrs. Grayling be B? Tuppence didn't answer, because the lights went out. Completely. The flat plunged into blackness so abrupt it swallowed the room. The hum of electricity vanished. The refrigerator silenced. The hallway lamp flicked off. Tommy froze. Power cut? Tuppence strained to listen. Not the whole block. I can hear the lift in use downstairs. Then, footsteps. Slow, quiet, deliberate. In the hall. Coming closer. Tommy moved silently toward the umbrella stand, reaching for the heaviest object, a brass-handled one they'd once used to discourage a burglar with poor career planning. Tuppence slipped beside him, fingers brushing his wrist in silent coordination. The footsteps paused outside their door. A faint metal click. Not a key. Something sharper. Tommy, Tuppence whispered. He nodded. Another slow step. Another click. Their breath stilled. Then, a shadow slipped across the crack under the door. Tommy's pulse hammered. Tuppence whispered, "Someone's cutting off escape routes." A cold realization pierced Tommy's voice. Whoever B is. A slow scrape sounded outside the door, final and absolute. They're not done cleaning up. And in the darkness, both of them understood that the past was no longer stalking them from a distance. It was here, inside the building, and closing in. The moment Tommy stepped into the dim marble foyer of the auction house, he knew the building was wrong. Not dangerous, not violent, simply wrong, in the way a room feels wrong after someone has rifled through one's belongings but has carefully put everything back. The air was too still. The lamps were lit too precisely. The night attendant avoided their eyes. Tuppence nudged him lightly. "Smell that?" He inhaled. Old paper, dust, glue. "Restoration glue," she whispered. "Something's being repaired." The attendant approached with an apologetic smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, we're closed." "Not to everyone," Tuppence replied. She gestured subtly toward the corridor where faint voices murmured behind a closed door. "We're here for the private sale." The man's smile flickered. Tuppence pressed on, her tone brisk and politely impatient. "Do inform the organizer that we've arrived." People rarely argued with Mrs. Beresford when she spoke that way. The attendant hesitated, swallowed, nodded, and disappeared down the corridor. Tommy murmured, "You do terrify people beautifully." Tuppence linked her arm through his. "Practice." A minute later, the attendant returned, and without meeting their gaze, ushered them toward the main exhibition hall. The hall felt transformed. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn halfway, casting the room in a theatrical twilight. A semicircle of chairs had been arranged before a long table upon which objects were displayed under glass domes. Around them stood perhaps 8 or 9 people, wealthy, quiet, each studiously pretending not to notice the others. One figure stood apart, a veiled woman wearing a dark coat with a stiff collar. She carried herself with an unmistakable, rigid elegance. Tommy whispered, "Tell me that isn't Mrs. Grayling." Tuppence watched the woman's posture, the precise angle of her chin. If it isn't, the resemblance is alarming. Tommy's brows knit. Her being present complicates matters. "Everything's complicated," Tuppence murmured. "We're simply becoming fluent in it." They approached the display table. Under a glass dome lay fragments of letters, old paper carefully flattened, some edges charred, some whole, each fragment pieced together like a forensic mosaic. Tuppence's breath caught. The destroyed lot. Reconstructed, Tommy finished grimly. Whoever was behind this sale had access to highly specialized restoration equipment and a dangerous degree of patience. One fragment had been almost completely restored. A portion of the handwriting was intact. "Fear is the cost of leaving truth behind. B hides by pretending weakness." Tommy leaned closer. Feigned incompetence, manipulation, charming others, shifting blame. Tuppence scanned the room, and one of them used those tactics. Before Tommy could answer, the doors at the back burst open and Roland Trevelyan stumbled in. He looked half alive, clothes dishevelled, hair wild, eyes wide with frantic, hunted desperation. His voice cracked. "Stop! Don't you dare sell those letters!" All heads turned. Trevelyan staggered forward toward the table, hands practically clawing at the air. "You don't understand. You'll condemn the wrong person. You'll finish what the traitor started." Tommy reached him. "Trevelyan, calm down." Trevelyan grabbed Tommy's lapel. "She's here. Burwell. Grayling. She always was." Gasps rippled through the circle. The veiled woman stiffened, but before anyone could react, another man entered through a different door, older, gaunt, trembling. Harold Linton, alive. He looked like a ghost forcing itself back into flesh, each breath a battle. His eyes were fixed on Trevelyan, not with hatred, but with a terrible, sorrowful certainty. "I must speak," Harold said, voice trembling. "I should have spoken long ago." Tommy stepped forward. "Harold, we know about the letter, the fragment." Harold shook his head. "Fragments won't save us. You must hear it from me." The veiled woman turned sharply. Trevelyan clutched Harold's arm with wild desperation. "Tell them she's the traitor! Tell them! You know—" Harold pulled free. "No, Roland, you misunderstand." But his words were swallowed by sudden darkness. The lights failed. The entire hall fell into absolute blackness. Not dim, not flickering. Black. Body black. People shouted. Someone knocked over a chair, glass shattered. Tuppence grabbed Tommy's arm and pulled him behind a marble statue, heart thundering. A shot split the air. One scream. Then silence. The lights flickered back to life. Harold Linton lay on the floor, blood blooming across his chest. Dead. The veiled woman, gone. Trevelyan was on his knees, shaking violently, clutching his own shoulder, a new wound staining his sleeve. Tommy rushed toward him. "Trevelyan! Can you hear me?" Trevelyan's eyes rolled with shock. She didn't want me silenced yet. Only him." Tuppence knelt by Harold's still body. His face, in death, looked both agonized and relieved. The auction staff stood frozen. Buyers whispered, horrified and fascinated. The restored fragments lay scattered across the table where someone had swept them aside in the chaos. Tuppence rose and moved to the table. One final surviving scrap had been preserved under a cracked dome. A careful hand must have secured it moments before the attack. 2 lines of slanted handwriting remained. The traitor was not Burwell alone. B acted with a partner none suspected. Tuppence felt her stomach tighten. The words pulsed with grim clarity. Not 1 traitor. 2. Tommy read over her shoulder. Partner? Who? Trevelyan? Harold? Someone outside the group? But as Tuppence stared at the fragment, everything they had gathered, every contradiction, every burn mark, every lie, reshuffled itself in her mind. "Look at Trevelyan," she whispered. Tommy turned. Trevelyan was staring at the fragment with something deeper than fear. Recognition. Tommy stepped closer. "Trevelyan, what is it?" Trevelyan's breath shook. A partner. Who?" Tuppence pressed. Trevelyan's eyes filled with a strange, hollow dread. "It wasn't Harold. It wasn't Grayling." His voice cracked. "Not at the beginning. It was—" But before he could finish, he collapsed sideways in a faint blood pooling around him from the new wound. Tuppence caught him before he hit the floor. Tommy yelled for help and 2 attendants ran forward, lifting Trevelyan carefully. "He needs a doctor," Tuppence ordered sharply. "Now!" As Trevelyan was carried away, Tommy returned to her side. "Whoever the partner is," he said, voice low, "they're desperate. Desperate enough to kill Harold. Desperate enough to restore the documents. Desperate enough to hunt Trevelyan through half of London." Tuppence's eyes shifted to the doorway where the veiled woman had vanished. "Grayling is part of it, but she's not the whole of it." Tommy looked at the broken fragments. "We need to find the partner." Tuppence nodded. "And quickly." A faint rustle made them both freeze. A page fluttered on the ground near the pedestal. One Trevelyan had dropped. Tuppence picked it up. Old paper. Shredded edges. A line of writing. "He will hide behind the ones who seek truth. He always has." Tuppence's blood chilled. Tommy whispered, "Who does that mean?" Tuppence stared at the words. "Hide behind the ones who seek truth." The meaning began forming in her mind, but not yet clear, not yet complete. "We're missing one last piece," she murmured. Tommy nodded grimly. "Then we find it." They stepped into the silent chaos of the hall, the weight of 2 decades of betrayal pressing around them. The partner of B was still out there, still alive, still watching, and as the letter warned, hiding in plain sight. For nearly an hour after the chaos of the auction hall, Tommy and Tuppence sat in their flat without speaking. The air between them was taut as violin wire, holding every unanswered question of the last 24 hours. The lights had returned, but the building still felt strangely hollow, as though its corridors were listening. The restored fragments from the sale lay on the table between them, weighted with a teacup to keep them from curling. Tuppence had already memorized every line, every stroke of ink. She sat with her fingers pressed together, staring at nothing and everything at once. Tommy finally broke the silence. "You've got it, haven't you?" Tuppence didn't look at him. "Nearly." Tommy stood and paced. Trevelyan said 2 enemies. The letters said 2 traitors, and Harold's fragment said the traitor hid behind those seeking truth. If it wasn't Harold, if it wasn't the double-crosser they rescued, then, Tuppence said softly, it was both Trevelyan and Mrs. Grayling. Tommy stopped. "Both?" "Yes." Tuppence's eyes gleamed with the terrible clarity of a puzzle snapping into place. They were partners long before the fire, long before the extraction mission. Tommy sank slowly into the chair opposite her. "Explain." Tuppence slid the fragments closer. Trevelyan and Grayling, Burwell, were the ones who staged the rescue chaos. Everyone believed the explosion was an attack, but it was partly their own doing. They planned an identity swap in the confusion. Burwell was meant to be the one who survived, respectable, inconspicuous. Trevelyan was meant to die and become a ghost agent. One alive, one dead. Perfect cover. "And Harold, the others?" Tommy asked. "Collateral," Tuppence said grimly. "Useful idiots to their minds." Tommy winced. "But something changed." "Yes," Tuppence nodded. "Trevelyan changed his mind decades later. His conscience finally woke up. He tried to expose the truth, or at least end his own participation. The auction lot was his attempt to do it quietly. Documents, confession fragments, anything to reveal that Burwell, Mrs. Grayling, was the traitor. But Grayling fought back. "Harder than he imagined," Tuppence said. "She destroyed the lot, burned part of it, tried to pin everything on Harold, and when that failed, she tried to kill Trevelyan." Tommy rubbed his temples. So the person he feared was his own partner. "Yes," Tuppence said, "and he knew if she was exposed, he would be too." Tommy exhaled. "We need to find him before she does." As though summoned by the words, an urgent knock rattled their front door. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a single look, wary, tense, and opened it. Trevelyan stood there, white-faced, trembling, lips pulled tight with desperation. His shoulder was bandaged, but blood had seeped through. He looked half dead and entirely frantic. "You must help me," he gasped. "She's coming to finish it. She knows I tried to reveal everything. Please, please, just help me reach the vault. The rest of the papers are there. They'll prove—" He swayed. Tuppence caught his arm. "We'll take you, quickly." The auction house at night felt like a cathedral whose congregation had fled mid-service. Shadows filled the corners. Footsteps echoed too loudly. The air was sharper, colder, as if waiting for confession. Trevelyan led them not to the main hall but to the lower level, the archive vaults, deep inside the building where steel doors guarded the most valuable and dangerous items. "This way," he whispered. "Room 4C. The documents. They were only partially burned. I salvaged what I could. She doesn't know I hid them here." "Who?" Tommy asked, though he already knew. Trevelyan answered with a laugh that bordered on hysterical. "The woman you think is so polished, so controlled. She killed Harold. She killed others. She even tried to kill me." They reached the vault corridor. The metal door at the end loomed like a tomb entrance. Trevelyan fumbled with the key. His hand shook so violently Tuppence took it from him and unlocked the door herself. Inside, the vault was small and lined with file cabinets and reinforced shelves. A single overhead lamp buzzed weakly. Trevelyan staggered toward a metal drawer and yanked it open. Inside were folders, envelopes, and a thick bundle of half-burned pages. "There," he whispered. "Everything. Enough to expose her. Enough to end this." A voice behind them said, "Not quite." They froze. Mrs. Grayling stood in the doorway. No veil, no smile, no mask left, only cold, calculated purpose. "Step away from that drawer," she said. "All three of you." Trevelyan whimpered. "Please, don't do this." Grayling's eyes sharpened. "You were supposed to die in Berlin. You chose not to, that was your mistake. And now I must clean up what you refused to let stay buried." Tommy stepped in front of Tuppence instinctively. Tuppence stepped in front of Tommy just as instinctively. Grayling raised the gun. "Touching, but unnecessary. I only need to shoot one of you to achieve the same effect." Tuppence nodded slowly. "You won't," she said. Grayling smiled tightly. "Won't I?" Tuppence's gaze drifted, just once, toward the vault panel on the wall. Tommy caught the look. A plan flickered between them silently. Tuppence said lightly, "Mrs. Grayling, I'm afraid you've made a strategic error." Grayling's eyes narrowed. "And what error is that?" "You brought us," Tuppence said, "into a vault." With one swift motion, she lunged sideways and slammed the emergency lockdown lever. A blaring alarm filled the chamber. Massive steel shutters dropped over the door. Grayling whirled and fired. The shot ricocheted off the new barrier. The vault sealed. All four were trapped. Grayling stared at Tuppence in disbelief. "You foolish woman," Tommy finished for her. "Just trapped you with witnesses." Grayling's face twisted, not with fear but fury. Trevelyan sank to the floor, shaking. "It's done. It's all done." Grayling turned on him. "You coward. You betrayed me after everything we built." "We built nothing," Trevelyan whispered. "Only lies." "You wanted to leave," she shouted. "You were going to expose us both." Tommy stepped between them. "Enough." Grayling's voice dropped to a chilling calm. "He and I were partners. Yes, two halves of B. We staged the explosion. We let the others take the blame. But he was never the weak one. He was the strategist, the liar, the one who could charm anyone." Trevelyan sobbed. "No, I only did what I was ordered." "By me?" Grayling laughed bitterly. "Don't flatter yourself. You were always my equal, my accomplice, my mirror." Tuppence watched Trevelyan closely. His face collapsed inward with every word, years of suppressed truth tearing through him. "You used Harold," Tuppence said softly. "You destroyed him." Trevelyan covered his ears. "Stop, please." "You used Roland," Tommy said to Grayling, "just as you used everyone, and when he grew a conscience, you hunted him." Grayling's voice was ice. "He was a liability." Trevelyan whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have died then." Tuppence knelt beside him. "But you didn't, and now the truth can be corrected." Sirens echoed faintly above, security responding to the lockdown. Grayling's composure flickered, then shattered. "You fools, do you think justice exists for people like us? They'll protect me. They always have." Tommy shook his head. "Not anymore." The bolt on the outer door clanged. Then another. Security shouted orders beyond the steel. Grayling lowered the gun slowly, as if the weight of decades had finally crushed her arms. For the first time, her voice trembled. "He and I, we weren't supposed to survive the blast. We improvised, we ran, we hid, we built new identities. You cannot imagine what it took to stay invisible." Tuppence said gently, "You should have told the truth." Grayling laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Truth? Truth is a luxury for the innocent." The vault door finally groaned open as guards forced the override. Grayling exhaled and closed her eyes. Trevelyan buried his face in his hands, and everything was over. Hours later, dawn crept pale over the city. Tommy and Tuppence walked slowly along the quiet pavement, exhaustion mixing with the strange relief that comes after long tension breaks. "Harold will be cleared," Tommy said softly. "At last." "Yes," Tuppence replied. "And Trevelyan will face justice, the right kind." Tommy nodded. "You know, it's odd." "What is?" "We saved the wrong man decades too late." Tuppence slipped her arm through his. "Nonsense." He smiled tiredly. "No?" "We saved the right truth," Tuppence said. "That's what matters." And together they walked down the street, the morning growing warmer, the past finally laid to rest behind them, where it belonged.